Hi everyone, welcome. For all of you joining us on this LinkedIn Live, I hope all of you are doing well from wherever you're connected. Um, it's um, it's a very special privilege for me to have somebody who I've known since 2016 or 2015, and I've worked closely with him and had a lot of learning, a lot of good fun interacting with him. And today I have him with me in this session as a guest of ours. He's also a mentor to the startups in the REVA program as a part of the Telangana mission. So for that way, I just wanted to make sure that I set this out up front. But at the same time, I think it's important before we begin some context. So startups is the large theme, the underlying theme for today's conversation, and specifically, so we're going to be talking about mentoring and the need for it, and maybe there are several other layers that we'll aim to peel throughout this conversation. Um, and again, startup founders, they are operating at multiple levels, different threads simultaneously open, and varying objectives, varying priorities. And it's important that they are able to take those right decisions. And what is important is, at that point in time when they have to take those decisions, they have to take it right. And it's a very tricky situation for most of the times, and it's not just a one-off thing. It happens on a daily basis. And what is important in that whole context and that setting is the ability to have the right kind of advice, right kind of suggestions coming through, and the right kind of inputs that allows these founders to take those decisions. And this is where the role of a mentor becomes very, very important. Across the board, I think mentoring is one of the top three expectations, when it comes to founder support. Of course, one being access to market, the other being access to funding, but mentoring always tends to feature among the top three. And today we're going to be discussing about what it is really about, and dive into some of those nuances as we will hear from our guest, and listen to him talk about mentoring in his own words. My name is Praveen Mokapati, and I am the host for your sessions. I represent the Telangana mission on which this session is being beamed on. The Telangana mission, for those who do not know, it is a center of excellence for artificial intelligence that is instituted by the government of Telangana. This got set up in the year 2020. Um, so this is a center of excellence which is powered by NASCOM on behalf of the government, and Telangana Mission works on a various bunch of different initiatives. Of course, one of the things which we are increasingly focusing on is how do we enhance the rate of AI adoption in the public sector as well as in the industry. We also work with startups, help them grow and scale through various interventions, including mentoring, the subject of today's discussion. And then, of course, various other programs where we look at encouraging innovation from the academic community, the student community in particular, as well as ways to drive more and more interventions in order to plug that gap between the skill gap that exists between demand and supply. So, of course, we also engage with various other stakeholder constituents periodically, and sessions of this kind is what we initiated since last week. And these sessions have largely been closed door for the startup community that we are currently supporting. But we realize there's so much wealth and knowledge that is available through these sessions that we decided to open it up. And this is something that we intend to do going forward. Now, with that introduction, I'd like to invite Shankaran, to say a few words, introduce himself, so that you all understand who he is, where is he coming from, and specifically in the context of mentoring startups. I would request Shankaran, you also to speak a few words in your newest role, which is of being a mentor. Shankaran.
Thanks, Praveen. It's good to be here. Thank you for having me here. And hello, everybody out there. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. As Praveen said, my most recent connection with Praveen is as part of the RevUp program, which is part of TAIM. And I work as a mentor with him for some of the startups that they kind of nurture under the program. I think what will be relevant for everybody who's listening is to kind of figure out what gives me the right to even be here, which is an important question, right? I mean, what do I bring to the table as a mentor? So I'll pick only the relevant points from a fairly long, as you can tell from looking at me, a fairly long career. I've been in the business world for the last 44 years now. I finished from IIM Bangalore back in 1979. But as I said, let me cherry pick some of the key pieces that are relevant to today, to this afternoon. I jumped ship from a multinational, fairly cushy job very quickly after I left campus, 6, 8 years into my career, and joined up with a bunch of guys as my first entrepreneurial experience. Uh, Believe it or not, it was a bubblegum company that we founded in Chennai. And the next 10, 12 years of my life was dedicated to building that company into a fairly significant entity in that space. That was my first real experience. One of the things I would call out from that experience is that that particular startup happened in an era when startups operated under a different set of, in a different environment, let me say, compared to, uh, assuming all of you who are listening are from the startup community, that compared to the environment, the world that you live in today. Just to give you an idea, we borrowed money from banks at 18, 19% interest to run our businesses, right? And we didn't have the whole idea of equity and venture capital and all of that didn't exist back then. So we really sweated and worked for the banks and built a business in a much harder way than today. Uh, 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 a very enriching experience and a very differently enriching experience. After that, it was a series of entrepreneurial experiences. I joined up with another startup called eShakti, which was one of the first online platforms offering a bouquet of services and products and services to the Indian expat community. That's where I went after we kind of shut down Servion, and I'm sorry, not Servion, Gum India. And if there are questions around that, be happy to take it later. And then from there on, I moved on to the company Servion, which was my last real stint. Again, joined as I was not one of the founders of the company, but I joined the founders at an early stage and very quickly became one of the founding team, so to speak, including in terms of ownership, right? Which journey ended in 2016 with an exit when we were bought out by a private equity player. And ever since I fell into this mentoring role, which is what is, and let me be candid about that. It's not something that I had in my mind uh, at the time when we were getting out of Servion, exiting Servion. I was not thinking, all right, now's the time I'm going to set up this company and I'm going to be a mentor to other startups. I had no such thing in mind. It just happened very organically. A couple of startups reached out to me, people from my past who knew me, who had worked with me, not inside Servion, but as partners or I had met at events. And the journey just took on from there. From that time, which is now 2015, second half to today, there has never been a day when somebody hasn't literally called up and said, "Can you do this for us?" And I've either engaged or not engaged. And it's so it just proves to me that there is a real demand for mentoring. Praveen happened to mention that is one of the big three demands from the community, and I know that, I feel that, because people are calling up and saying, "Can you come and do this for us? And can you come and do that for us?" More on what exactly that work involves as we go through the session, but that's who I am. I've spent these 40, 45 years mostly in entrepreneurial roles. I've been cross-functional, cross-domain, started with fast-moving consumer goods, bubblegum, mentoring companies in the AI, ML space today. So the contrast cannot be more significant. Global experience, worked all over the world, um, all the way around the world, really, more countries than I remember visiting now. And so that's who I am.
Thank you, Shankaran. Clearly a checkered set of experiences that you've accomplished and accumulated over these years. I was unsure if you're going to bring up the gray hair experience or the gray hair aspect to your experience and to your repertoire, but I'm glad you did. But clearly, you bring a lot of that knowledge across all these different settings. Thank
Thank you.
you for doing this. So, Shankaran, I think one of the things which I think it's important to clearly understand and set the baseline in terms of understanding what mentoring is. Have that definition, if at all there is any, and if something that you would want to define it. How would you see, what do you see as a mentor? What is mentoring really? Help us understand your perspective there.
So I think about it in multiple dimensions, right? And you're right. I don't know if there's one good definition of what a mentor really is. I think there are many definitions out there. All of them are probably partially right and partially perhaps not incorrect, but a little off target, so to speak. So one context that I try to keep in mind is I ask myself, what's the difference between a supervisor, a coach, and a mentor? first question that I think we need to be clear about. And I think that uh, the answers are very clear there in so far that the coach, the supervisor at one end of the spectrum actually is, for want of a better word, your boss in an organizational setup where the goals are set by the supervisor, of course, collaboratively, hopefully, and there's a team involved, and everybody drives towards a purpose, and decision making rests with the supervisor and the person, the team member. Who becomes the mentee in the other context, the team member gets whatever freedom is delegated to her to execute the task that has been assigned by the supervisor. That's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum, and the coach falls somewhere in the middle, is the mentor, where there is really no team involved. There really isn't a, even if the founder of a startup comes and becomes a mentee to me in the current role, my goal really is to help the mentee become the best version of herself that she could be, right? And that's not from me, that's the quotation from somewhere, I forget where. I remember very good quotes and I forget who said it. I think, and I don't hold me to this, was a quotation that was attributed to one of the famous football coaches from one of the big teams, United or Manchester United or one of those teams. Anyway, so what does that mean? What that means is that, to me, mentorship means providing the kind of inputs, insights, information, experience, wisdom, each of which is a different entity, to the mentee in a pull model. So that's the other dimension, right? One was about the team, the context, the delegation, the structure, the common goals, all of that. And the other, which is clearly not a pull model. This is not something that the supervised person reaches out for when and if he needs it. It's something that is imposed on him. It's part of the system. Whereas in a mentor model, you have to pull it. The mentor is not going to sit around and say, but you need to get up in the morning and do this. The mentor is waiting for the mentee to come and say, I'm in this situation. I don't know what to do, or I'm thinking of doing this. What do you think? So there's a pull push dimension. Mentorship is much more on the pull side. Mentorship is about sharing insights and wisdom and experiencing and allowing experiences and allowing the mentee to figure out what path he or she wants to follow. So these are just a couple of dimensions, right, of the differences between mentorship and being a boss or a coach or a supervisor. I mean, the coach falls somewhere in the middle, right? You think of a coach, you think of sports is a great example. You think of a coach like a tennis coach. I'm a tennis nut and a tennis player from yesteryear, and it's only very recently, as of the last 6 months, literally, that the ATP, the Association of Tennis Professionals, which is the body that governs tennis, has allowed coaching on court. So till now in tennis, the coach could sit, but he couldn't speak to the player, his coachee, while the match was on. Not allowed. That's just started now, and it's a big controversy, by the way. Should it be allowed or not? And many players are divided because they're saying that it's a distraction. I don't want to be told when I'm playing. I've got problems to solve. And tennis players think of their 5 hour session on the court as, I will have problems. I need to solve those problems. I don't want somebody else telling me. Look, so the coach is somewhere in the middle. There are many people who say, no, I want that coaching on court. Right? But the model is again a little different. Whereas the mentor is even more different. The mentor is very often not even there physically when the mentee is playing the match. I'm using that in an illustrative way, right? The founder CEO runs his company. The mentor is not always there. The mentor is somebody who was then tapped into for a set of inputs, and then the mentee goes back into the play arena and does his stuff. So each cycle of interaction hopefully equips the mentee better to play the game, so to speak. Does that
Right.
make sense, Praveen? Do you want
It
to?
does. It does, and it sort of also touches upon some of the other questions that I was hoping to ask, which is why is it even required for the mentor, for the startup founder? How does it even add value? Again, in that example that you talked about, there are many places and areas where mentoring can help, and there are also places where it may not help. In fact, it could even be a detriment to the founder. So from that point of view, how do you approach this whole mentoring relationship? And specifically, there is always that fine line. Since we talked about that tennis example that you cited, there's that line where you shouldn't cross, and there are times where you have to cross. because there is this obviously this bit about learning from your own mistakes, which is always there, and you learn better when you do a mistake, and and that's how it is across the board, and needn't just be in the context of startup founders, in any other setting as well. So over there, what is that role that you see a mentor can tend to play, and also what is that balance that a mentor should be treading?
That's an extremely difficult question to answer and an extremely pertinent question. And honestly, in the last 6 years, I wouldn't say that I have understood perfectly where on that whole spectrum mentoring should actually fit. The spectrum that I'm talking about is how much do you involve yourself really? How much do you get into the game, so to speak? Since I took a tennis analogy, I'll stick with the verbiage that goes with that. How much do you get into the game? Do you actually sit courtside and give input while the guy is playing, or not? And that's the question. So, what are the problems here? Right? It's also dependent on the personality of the founder. This has been my experience. You can get sucked in too deep, in which case you're creating a dependency in the relationship, which to my mind is bad, because the whole purpose of mentoring to my mind is to create an independent capacity, independent of yourself. In a manner of speaking, if the mentor is not looking forward to the day when he becomes redundant to the relationship, then he's not mentoring properly. But certain founder personalities will suck me in too deep, where, for example, you get called in too often into specific execution tasks and the mentor is happy to leave it to you, saying, would you help me manage this? Now, a lot of mentors will say that I'm not getting into any execution tasks at all, which to my mind is the other extreme. And again, I find that uncomfortable because you talked, Praveen, about the point that you've made a lot of mistakes and you've also learned a lot. 44 years, you've learned something, you've learned a lot about what you did wrong, you've learned something about what you did right. How do you pass that on? And I find that the classroom session has its limitations, where you're offline, so to speak, and you're giving an academic discourse on how you should handle that situation. Every now and then, I believe it's important for the mentor to step into the arena shoulder to shoulder and kind of be on the job and showing how does this work, right? So that's the balance that I struggle to find still. And on top of this balance that I'm struggling to find, which is saying, listen, let's do this once together. Let's assume, for example, that the mentee is setting out to raise money. Common example. So you spend hours in the lab, so to speak, and you create a pitch deck, and then you tell the and the mentee is going out there trying to raise money for the first time in his or her life. And so you're giving all this theory and saying this is the deck, this is the flow of communication. You got 8 slides, you got 15 minutes. If you don't get it done in 15 minutes, they're not going to talk to you. Blah blah blah. And then the guy goes and comes back. I believe that the first couple of pitches is necessary for you to be there in the room as a fly in the wall, step in and course correct if required, minimize the if required part, be sensitive enough not to overtake the discussion, but step in a couple of times. You need to do that as well, is my view. So there's an element of being hands on and an element of being hands off. Learning happens in the classroom, learning happens on the job, in the arena, so to speak. You don't want to get too deep in the arena, because I have had experiences with founders in the last 7 years where, for example, I become a part of the executive team. And the founder is very comfortable saying, "Oh, Shankaran will deal with that." I'm saying that's the worst thing you can say to me, because I don't want to deal with running the company, because then I'm failing, right? And this is a constant balance that you have to find. Again, please keep me honest here. I lose track sometimes of the exact question, but I hope I'm to the point.
Yes, no, no, of course, no, Shankaran, you've touched upon that balance, and where you need to step in and where you shouldn't, and of course, I understand the point that you're bringing in, that it has to do with the founder's personality as to what is the founder most comfortable with, and of course, it starts out when you begin those conversations. The first set of engagement sort of allows you to understand those boundaries. It starts to form. It still is blurry, even for many times ahead, but then it starts to become more and more clearer along the way. And I think until that, as a mentor, what I understood is that you would want to play safe. You really don't want to cross the boundary too much, but if required and where required, and if you feel it is for the betterment of the founder and his business or her business, you will want to step in, and even if it is not what the founder desires. Is that correct? Is that
Even
understood
if it's
right?
not what the founder desires, sometimes yes, you push your way in, and if the founder desires it too much, you hold back enough to communicate the other message. And just to be fair to the discussion on this particular question, I said there's the founder's personality that is also overlaid on all this. So is the mentor's personality.
Mm.
So at Slingshot Accelerator, for example, my partners and I, we are not at all on the same point in the spectrum, all of us. For example, tend to, if I err at all, I err on the side of stepping in too much, right? And one or two of my partners, in my opinion, would step in too little. And this is a constant debate we have internally saying, guys, we need to calibrate here. One of the greatest values that founders see in us is our ability to step in. Even though you're called a mentor and theoretically you're not supposed to step in. So I think mentoring is a far more complex piece in the context of a startup than in the English dictionary. I think the last word on this hasn't been written. That's my view.
All right. So Shankaran, now, so if you were to, I don't know if there are any strategies, specific strategies that you follow. Again, we've been speaking about it in some ways, touching about how you approach this. But then, do you have a structure to it as to how you go about it? Again, some of them could be very tactical, right? At point-wise interventions that you'd want to bring in, like you said, stepping in, and that is maybe with or without the agreement with the founder, but more so from the point of view of whether it is beneficial for the founder or not. You will take those steps, but then those are tactical steps, and then some broader strategies that have a longer course to run. Is there a certain method and approach that you employ when you
Yes,
commence a mentoring exercise with the
that,
startup founder?
that's again a question that really demands attention. So as I mentioned at the start of this, I think when I was introducing myself, I kind of fell into this, right? And then we got together and formed this company. That's the name you guys are seeing, Slingshot Accelerator. That's the firm that I work with, and it's a partnership firm. And we are a bunch of guys who do this now in a formal, organized way. The first formalization being that we are not individuals; we are an organization, right? Now, what we are working on is methodization. In fact, we have given it a name. We have a piece of intellectual property that we are building out, which operates something like a navigation board. We've given it a name. I won't necessarily unveil it here, but the idea is to be able to chart the journey that a startup needs to take from scratch to scale. And that journey goes through multiple phases and stages, which we've defined, and we are beginning to populate based on data that we are seeing as to what are the kind of decisions and interventions required in each stage. Now, this is a work in progress and a very early work in progress. But the answer is yes, there is a methodization that is going on so that we don't purely rely on gut and instinct to how does this whole process in an engagement as a set of mentors or a mentor or a company that provides the mentoring offer. And it starts with, and maybe this will be of interest, what we call with a discovery process. We do a discovery workshop with the founder that lasts for maybe a couple of days, meaning 15, 16 hours spread over maybe 2 to 3 weeks. And it's a structured workshop. We run the workshop and we put the founders through a series of examinations which allow us to then do a need assessment. And then we translate that into a scope of engagement. And we get the founder to say, this sounds about right, this is what I want. It's only then that we start the journey today. So it's come a long way from, hey, will you come and help me? And me saying, yeah, sure, why not? To saying, hey, will you come and help me? And us saying, yeah, but what do you need? Where exactly are you in your journey? Where do you think you need help? Where do you want to go? Where do you want to get to in 3 years, in 5 years, in all kinds of dimensions? How much wealth do you want to create? How much revenue do you want to make? Uh, What kind of geographies do you want to straddle? Small examples, right? A lot of deeper questions. So yeah, methodization I think is important. Otherwise, all of the abstract stuff that we talked about before this question will overtake the relationship, and then everybody is winging it, right? where on this paradigm should I be? Should I be into the execution? Should I not be into the execution? What should I get engaged in? Should I interfere in sales? Should I interfere in the whole financial management part? Better to have a method. Yes, there should be a method. We do have one. So, and it follows, as I said, discovery workshop and then a navigation board.
All
Praveen.
right. So Shankar, if I understand that correct, um, so there is this method, of course, and there is this bit about bringing about an alignment of your capabilities as a mentor, and the ask which is coming in from the founder, and these asks can keep varying, they will keep evolving, keep changing over time, but broadly, the understanding would be through that discovery workshop, like you just said, is to make sure that you understand the needs and the specific asks that are coming from the founder, and also internally to be able to figure out whether you have the capability to deliver on those expectations.
Yes.
And one of the things that we do as a part of the program when we bring in the mentors and mentees is clearly that, hey, as a mentor, for example, with you, we'll ask what are the areas where you'd like to support with, or where you think you feel more confident of enabling these founders with. And then we capture that information. And on the other side, we also do another exercise with the startup founders, the mentees, and understand what are the areas of support they need. And of course, one of the other things that we do is highlight the list of mentors that have volunteered to spend time. In fact, we are
Yeah.
currently in the process of making these assignments. We have about 40 of y'all that have kindly agreed to mentor these startups, and then ask the mentees, the startup founders, what are their requirements, and then use that information from both sides of the platform to be able to form those connections, and then you know uh, ensure that there is not too much of a friction when the introductions happen. But then the methodology that you described is furthermore for you to develop a more deeper understanding, which I think makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So Shankaran, and this brings me to you know to the facet to the aspect of mentorship, which could be very personal to an individual, somebody like you or somebody else who's playing that role of a mentor. Now, for you, what is the most rewarding aspect of this? I mean, of course, you've accomplished a lot of different things across your career, 44 years that you mentioned in your introduction. But then what is it that keeps you going? Why is this so interesting? And what is it that makes you feel fulfilled when you do this?
I probably end up sounding like I'm kind of quoting something from a book, but I genuinely am not. I really genuinely find that what gives me the greatest joy now is to share from my experience. And that's not just with mentoring. I find that all the time. I find that in my family. I find that talking about things that bring some value to the younger people in my family, or even to not younger people, but people who've not perhaps had that exposure or that experience, it's a tremendously fulfilling feeling, right? The My life has been such that I have perhaps been, and this is what I think, and everybody's free to judge whether that's a true statement or not. But my life has been such that I have had, let's say, well above the average in terms of exposures to different kinds of challenges and circumstances and situations in life, work life as well as personal life. I've really had to deal with a whole lot of different challenges through the last 44 years, a huge gamut of different kinds of situations. And I find that for most situations that somebody comes to me and says, I'm seeing this, what do you think we can do with this? I have something in the reservoir of knowledge that I'm ready to share. And there's nothing more rewarding than that. It really makes you feel good. And as I said, that's everybody says teaching is a joy, and I don't even know if I'm teaching. I'm just sharing, right? It's up to the person who's listening to pick it up and make what she will or he will from that whole experience. To me, it's as simple as that. It's as simple as that. I just wish I could just continue to share. And I'm not particularly keen to then later see, did you take my advice? That's okay. I'm past that stage. If I was a supervisor, I would want to know that, right? Okay, I told you this. What did you do with that? Did you build some competence around that? That's not there anymore. It's just that this is something that I
Understood.
know of. Here it is. Take it and do with it what you will.
All right, I'm going to, specifically touch upon something you just mentioned, and you said that it needn't be even for younger people, even for the maybe the older ones in your family or even otherwise. Just the fact that they have not been exposed to the setup and the complexities, that you have experienced, and by the virtue of your own experience, you realize that you could add value. Now we have definitely a few founders in our community who comprise of fairly senior leaders, right? So they put 20 years in the industry and quite accomplished at that, and there's no taking away anything at all from them. And by the virtue of their experiences, obviously they're very confident about executing their own strategy, and and are very clear about how they want to go about achieving that, right? So now, in cases like that, do you think mentoring is an overkill, or do you think mentoring can add value? And if so, how?
You know, here's the way I look at my own life, and in that maybe lies the seeds of the answer to that, right? Even after saying what I said about having led this very varied life and dealt with multiple situations, and therefore having amassed all kinds of experiences and information and knowledge, and hopefully some wisdom as well along the way, I still find that I learn things every day. Somehow or the other, I find something that I say, oh, that's an insight. I didn't know that, right? I like to think of myself as a lifelong learner. So that's one dimension that I think of when I'm dealing with somebody who obviously has the capability to do pretty much everything that he or she is setting out to do as a founder. And that point, that piece is, I think, important for founders to realize, which is that whatever you know, you still don't know enough, because a startup will throw stuff at you that you didn't anticipate, right? Even if in your third and your fourth startup, something new could always happen, and that could trigger something. That's one. The second part is that one part is knowledge about the tools of the trade, so to speak. I know how to do this, the know-how, if you want to put it that way, right? The other part is your who you are and what kind of blind spots do you carry, right? I think a mentor's role also is to say, have you considered this? When you ask a mentee, have you considered this? There's a high chance that the mentee, once his or her eyes are open to that, already has the tools to deal with it. That's why it's called a blind spot. You've not considered it at all. I mean, there are some good essays written by a couple of guys who, over their lives, coached Roger Federer. And they were asked the same question. What do you tell the guy? I mean, what doesn't he have in his arsenal, right? He's got a great serve. He's got a great backhand. He's got a great volley. He moves like silk. He's mentally strong. You're a coach. What do you tell him? I mean, what do you tell him? So your job is to observe him and say, I thought you did this. And I would recommend to anybody who asks this question to go and watch that video on YouTube about that Atul Gawande, the surgeon who wrote the book on being mortal and became an author as well. He released a 23-minute video on coaching. I would strongly recommend you watch that. As an accomplished surgeon, he took a coach and then he discovered that he was doing stuff that he wasn't even aware he was doing in surgery. And he said it was such an eye opener for him. It's not that he didn't know what to do next once it was pointed out to him. So I believe you always need a mentor. If you go back to Indian lore, you always need a guru, right?
Of course. So thank you for mentioning that, Shankaran. And again, it is their prerogative. If they see value and they understand that there are these blind spots that they can be alerted about, then this is probably one conduit for them to be able to listen to such information. But again, we don't emphasize, we don't make it mandatory for founders to leverage this, because only when a process like this is self-selected, only then it makes a lot of sense. So
I think so. And I
um,
think I go back to, sorry, I'm taking another few seconds. I go back to the fact it has to be on a pull basis. If the mentee
yeah.
doesn't feel the need for a mentor, now nobody should shove it down anybody's throat, right? Yeah.
Absolutely, and that is the idea that we carry as well, and we encourage. We definitely say, hey, and what we essentially do is we remind them, because they have 150 things on their plate, and then
Yeah.
it just can get lost. And while they say that this is important, they haven't been able to allocate time, and we just say that, hey, if you feel this is important, you will still find a way to allocate time. So
Yeah.
we will wait, but there is obviously a threshold. So that's that. In the meanwhile, for the listeners, if there are any questions that you'd like to have us ask Shankaran, please do use the comments feature. Please engage with us. Let us know if you have any thoughts. If you are in a particular moment, you're stuck and you are thinking about it, or you have any question at all that is in the realm of mentor-mentee relationship, or something that you expect, as somebody who would like to be mentored. Again, it's also a question that is worth asking. Do you find, Shankaran, this is something which I realize in my conversations with various other mentors, that there are certain founders that are not coachable, or not willing to appreciate what mentoring brings. You mentioned again a little earlier that your job is to highlight those blind spots, and share your yarn or opinion or your suggestions based on the experiences that you bring. And again, if you see that they commit those mistakes, and again, they're not getting coached, they're making those own mistakes, like say in the same example of Atul Gawande, he keeps doing those despite being told by a coach that, hey, these are the lacunae that you have in your own skill. And then what do you do then? I mean, how do you address something like that? And this will be the last question, before, at least for the audience, I will definitely want to bring in a guest that we have hidden. You will see that guest when we bring her on board. But I'll first ask Shankaran to respond to this question. Shankaran.
Couple of responses. There is sometimes, and we've had that experience as well. I've had that experience as well. There's nothing you can do, and those kind of relationships fizzle out in a very unsatisfactory way for both parties. The mentor feels that I haven't really been able to impact anything, and the mentee feels that I didn't get value out of this. Now, out of maybe 15 relationships I've had over the last 5 or 6 years, maybe one or two that I can think of have ended up that way. Most have gone the other way, which is that the relationship has ended up being broader than originally visualized. So that's really one part of the whole equation. The only other observation that I'd have is, I think the biggest challenge that I've faced as a mentor is something that comes with the environment today, which is that I think management theory and management wisdom has taught us to be extremely tangible, right? And so, in initial conversations with mentors, it is not unusual for the mentor to want, and the more experienced the mentor is, the more likely these demands are likely to be there. Saying, list out the outcomes. How much revenue will you bring? How much funds will you help me raise? And I don't think a mentoring relationship works that way. It's a far more abstract concept, right? You're talking about blind spots and course correction and helping with some execution, not helping with other execution. And I think that works against the idea of mentoring, which is that, okay, this is yet another something that I buy. And as an output of this purchase that I'm making, I should check the following boxes. I wish it were that predictable. Doesn't work that way. So that's one of the challenges in mentoring, is to get that first discovery workshop and expectation set. If you can't do that right, then you're going to get into this trap of, I'm not seeing value, and mentor feeling frustrated and all of that good stuff. But few and far between, really.
Okay. Heard you loud and clear there, Shankaran. So before we bring the special guest, there's a question from the audience. This is from Prateek, who's the co-founder of one of the startups that is part of the Reva program. A startup is called Untype. So the question, he says, I'm reading out verbatim. A question to Shankaran sir, based on his experience, immense experience. When working with founders, especially in the recent years, what are the top three things in general? That's his question. What are the top three things that founders often get wrong, or the areas where mentors are likely to be more beneficial? Top three areas.
Okay, this is a little bit of a provocative answer I'm going to give you, Pratik. Is it?
Pratik.
Yeah, Pratik. Okay, I think that all founders have this problem, starting from when we started our bubblegum company. Okay, we think our product is the greatest, and everybody will buy it. One of the first things that founders get wrong, one of the biggest things that founders get wrong, in my opinion, is that the strategy and the positioning is always worthy of reinspection, because it's predicated on a belief that I am unique and I have no competition. I see this over and over and over again. And the more you drill into it, the more you understand that that is rarely the case. unless you're in some fundamental research and you're in an invention, not even an innovation. Today's market is so crowded, everybody has competition. So I think that assessment of my space and the revenue that I can drive basis of a realistic understanding of the market and market dynamics is number one in my opinion. That's one. I think that the next few are, interchangeable. This sits at the top, is the apex predator, but the next few are kind of interchangeable. Where how do you construct a team? I find that goes wrong very often. Right. Uh, I'm not going to bring in funding. Funding is more like, if I don't have money, I can't run the business. So that's not a top. That's not the question, as I understood it from Pratik. What are the things that founders get wrong? You have to get a team in place. You have to have the right people in the right place, empowered the right way to to carry your dream forward. That's the second thing that goes wrong very often. One of my founders once told me this, and we had this big argument about it, which is that a founder apparently goes through uh, four leadership teams in his journey from scratch to scale. Meaning, you hire your one drop, your C suite, so to speak, under you as CEO, and you churn them 3 to 5 times in a period of 5 years. I think that, and we had this discussion, that founder and I. I think that is saying that there is no better way to do this. I disagree. You should be able to create a team that lasts because your company is going to last. And if you're failing in that, that's something you need to learn from. The fact that you're churning it 3 to 5 times is the problem, right? My view. My view. So that would be a close number two, in my opinion. Strategy, positioning, team, everything is about people in my mind. And then a whole host of other stuff, right? Which are more operational in sense. Yeah.
All right, super. So I think this is it's very helpful, Pratik. I hope that answered your question. And if there is something more that you would like to ask, please do go ahead and use the comments feature for that. So with that, I'd like to invite the guest that has been listening in, but and I think it will also add a new dimension to this conversation that we're having. So meet our guest, Nishta Rohatgi. Nishta is the ex-founder of Providentia Labs, one of the startups that was part of the Cohort One program. Uh, the title is a giveaway. She's an ex-founder, so which sort of also alludes to the kind of conversations that we hope to have with Nishta around. So, Nishta, why don't you introduce yourself to us? Just give us a minute brief, and I don't know if you want to double click on the ex-founder bit. I'll let you do that, Nishta.
Okay, sure. So first of all, Praveen, thanks for having me here. Thanks for giving opportunity to have this interaction. Hi, Shankaran. It's great to
Hi.
see you.
Good to
Hi.
see you too.
So yes, currently I'm working as VP Head of Operations for one of the blockchain startups. But before that, I had a very fulfilling 3 years stint of bootstrapping my own startup. So, as it is mentioned there, so I bootstrapped Providentia Labs for almost 3 years. I have almost 18 years of experience, and after gaining almost about 16, 17, like 14, 15 years in the industry, I decided to take a plunge, and that's when, thanks to Telangana AI Mission and thanks to Shankaran sir, I got this opportunity to work with both of you. So yeah, that's briefly about myself.
Okay, so Nishta, thanks for that brief introduction. So now you've obviously experienced mentoring from Shankaran and also a few others alongside him. Now, what we've been hearing so far in this discussion is a mentor's perspective in terms of how do they look at mentoring and how does Shankaran look at mentoring specifically in this conversation. Now, what would be interesting to listen is the founder's perspective, a perspective that you brought in when you first got to self-select Shankaran as one of your preferences of mentors that you'd like to engage with. And when you were doing that, obviously you had a context, you had a set of challenges of sorts that you were facing as a startup founder. What were those challenges that you were facing, and what led, and of course they led you to eventually use that as a basis to initiate this whole mentoring engagement with Shankaran, and maybe if you can also extend that into helping the audience understand how did mentor this particular mentor Shankaran helped you navigate those challenges? Again, Shankaran is here. It can be a little awkward. It can be overwhelming, one of those things, but I'm sure you both have a great relationship. But I'm also sure that Shankaran would be happy to listen to your perspective in this kind of discussion. Nishta.
This is your
Yeah.
chance, Nishta. Go for it.
Yes. So when I started, it was early 2020, and I was a solo founder, and I was trying to do something which, in my mind, was supposed to create a very big impact on how we acquire language, how we learn language, and that's what I was trying to build as a solo founder. And then when I started, immediately after that, pandemic hit, right? So I was talking to a lot of people, gaining a lot of perspective. Everybody was telling me, oh, there's a great value in this, and this is how you should do, this is how you should do. But being a solo founder who was bootstrapping, so in the name of resources, I only had a little bit of saving and my 24 hours to do things. And that's when I got associated with Telangana AI Mission, and then this whole mentorship program came up. And when I saw Shankaran sir over there as a mentor, so I thought that, and Shankaran sir was already mentoring startups in AI and ML space at that point of time. So I thought that because I need somebody to advise me and guide me on that front, and that is how I thought that I'll start working with Shankaran. But as we started working, what happened, and as Shankaran touched upon in the beginning of this conversation, that how much you step in and how much you pull back. So in my case, because I was a solo founder, I need a lot of input and a kind of somebody with whom I can bounce my ideas, take feedback, do the course correction. So Shankaran sir, an entire Slingshot team worked with me for 6 months, as if like they were part of the team. Every day basis, we had our conversations, our discussions. And while I was like talking to a lot of other people in the industry, so Shankaran sir and his team made me very focused on the long term vision, that even if we are taking this small step which may be useful uh, in the current scheme of things and get us some additional resources or some benefit, is it taking us towards the larger goal that we decided in the beginning? And Shankaran sir, please feel free to add on that. But my experience with Shankaran has been extremely hands on, and like I can go ahead and discuss things not only related to startup. And the experience that I had with him, he was completely invested, or interested. Startup is definitely the key thing which was common, because of which we started interacting, and that was the key goal. But as I continued to work with Shankaran sir, it is more like they are interested in my personal success. And startup is definitely a part of the life and it has to be successful. But the mentorship that I have got on more on the personal level and in the company level, so that's the kind of association I had or still have.
That's quite fantastic to hear. And since you talked about, well, of course, the scope of engagement was really, especially when we bring mentors like Shankaran on board, this is only to limit themselves to the professional engagement, which is really, hey, this is a startup, this is a founder that represents a startup, and there are a bunch of areas that they need help with, and you all can support them. And that's really where our job as a program, we tend to stop. But then I'm really thrilled to hear you talk about that the learnings and the experiences that you've gained through this mentoring initiative, and specifically with Shankaran, that it allowed you to also gain several levels, at a personal level as well, right? So and this is where this also is a good segue for me to ask you my next question. And how has, and specifically if you can bring in some illustrations, I think it'll be really helpful, Nishta. How has Shankaran influenced your ability to take decisions, and essentially your overall approach to operating Providential Labs while you're still a founder back then? How did, what specific role did Shankaran contribute into?
Yeah. So when I was working with Shankaran sir and the Slingshot team, so we decided that we will work together for 6 months. And I'm grateful for that all the time that Shankaran sir and Slingshot team had given me, unconditionally. That 6 months, whatever it takes, let's do this, let's make it success. But if we don't reach at the destination in 6 months, then we reevaluate the situation. That's how do we take it forward. And that's what we did. So everything that we were doing at that point of time is to keep this in mind, that because I had already invested time, building this. Uh, so everything that we were doing, keeping this in mind, that we have to take it to the stage where we see the growth, we see the journey after this. And as I said in the beginning, like, we were interacting on daily basis and anything and everything. So right from a very high level vague idea, if we see that there is a value in this idea, then how to go to the last point in that idea to make it executable. Nothing should be vague, because sometimes you just deal with a lot of ideas and you don't know how to actually implement it. So how to, like, step by step, you just drill down everything, put it on paper, so you have a clear execution plan of anything and everything that you are planning to do, and whether it is worth doing it, whether it is important to do to take you to reach that level where you see the growth path or to the next stage of company growth. So in decision making process, we had these deliberations, and then once we stick to some idea that okay, we are going to go ahead and implement it. Just to give you an example, that should we follow B2B route, because the product that we were building had, I mean, a B2B could be a one good segment, or should we follow B2C route, wherein we can acquire a lot of user base, maybe don't worry about revenue and think on a valuation point of view. So these were the things that we deliberated, and we thought market is not right. Let's focus on, how can we make little revenue, even if the route is harder. And then what do we need to do that? So from idea to entire execution journey, that's the support I got from Shankaran sir, and very objectively they helped me to decide the path. But they always gave me freedom, whichever way you want to choose. But they always asked very pertinent questions, um, to help me to take a right decision, at least, which felt right, most appropriate decision at that point of time. Yeah.
All right, thanks, Nishta. And this is actually something which I also wanted to discuss with Shankaran. It's about enabling founders like Nishtha to take decisions. And Shankaran, in the past, you've alluded to uh, startup founders always are amidst decisions and decisions that they'll need to take. Uh, and Nishtha has given that context, and this question was also centered around that. Do you want to share anything on that front in terms of decisions and decision making?
Yeah, I was thinking while Nishta was speaking that it's finally a matter of how you think about a decision, right? And if you break it down into its component pieces, as you're looking at a decision, the first thing is to gather information. So even there is a decision about what kind of information do I need to make this decision. That itself is a decision. And I think that in our engagement, not just with Nishta, with other people that we work with as well, very often there is there is never enough information. Take that as read. But even within the available information, very often people tend to disregard key pieces of information into the decision set. So I think the key insights that a larger team, including a mentor, can give you is to say, I need to assemble the following information. Of all of this, I don't have so many pieces. I should be conscious that I don't have so many pieces. Of the remaining pieces of data and information that I have, what is it telling me? And then how do I take the decision? Because we're all human beings, we're all biased. We look for information itself in a biased way to support the decision, which is often already taken, right? That's the way we humans work. We take the decision and then look for the data to support the decision instead of looking for the data and arriving at the decision. So yeah, it's a skill in and of itself. So we try to impart that skill, saying that's not what the data is saying.
Right, Shankaran, thanks for that. And maybe a last question before I wind up this discussion, and this is to Nishtha. So Nishtha, now obviously you're working in a company, you are essentially an ex-founder, but then I'm sure there are certain aspects of the mentoring that you underwent which pervades your career, whether you are a founder or not a founder. And are there certain things that you would want to distill out from your experiences, which you say that, hey, this even applies, even in your current role, and how you have your outlook towards solving problems?
Yeah, so one aspect that I want to highlight, and this is not about my current role, what I am doing, but about the startup only, that Shankaran sir advised me that always see, don't ever mix yourself with startup. Your startup is not your identity per se. You can always do other things, and I think that was one thing that always remained with me. That okay, if this is not working out the way we visualized, maybe I can do something else. Now, coming to what are those specific aspects that always remain with me while I'm working as a professional in a different organization. So some of the things that the structures that we had built, when I was working on the product, then some of the things that we take for granted and we don't pen down those things, and we think, oh, we already know. And plus the background research part that Shankaran sir has mentioned. I mean, we know that we all have to do this, but sometimes you take it casually and you don't do it. But when you pen down these things, then you see the kind of value you get, and your ideas itself become more clear. So I think that is one aspect that I still carry. And I mean, yeah, so that I would mention. And the other
Okay,
thing for
thank
this, yeah, but sorry, but the other thing that I want to highlight, and for everybody in the audience, also, like, mentorship for me has been, um, being a mentee has been very rewarding for me, because I did not see mentorship as the like only the startup oriented thing or only one task oriented thing. For me, it was more like learning from the experience, and which I feel that is continued even whether there is a startup or there is no startup or anything. But that learning continues for me, and the association that we have built, that continues for me.
No, very, very pertinent, very valid closing that you did, Rishta. Thank you so much for doing that, because clearly it pervades even beyond your identity as a founder. And there's a lot of knowledge and wealth of knowledge that can be drawn from experience of mentors like Shankaran and others as well. So clearly, it's an angle, it's a perspective that I would strongly encourage the startup founders that are listening in to the session live or the recorded version of this. But I think one of the things that Shankaran, Nishta, you and I, we were discussing is that um, you know, there is this story about a founder in you, Nishta, which started out and then has decided to drop that idea and get back to work. And then this is the kind of story that it's not a fairy tale story, right? Clearly, it is not. At least from the conventional media hype and the paints that are being put on the newspapers, right? Hey, everything is hunky dory. Of course, the market's not great and all that, but the thing is, the human mind is more trained to appreciate and have a tendency to bring more affinity to the good stories. But it is important to talk about stories like yours, where it needn't always work, and more importantly, the role of a mentor to facilitate that tough decision. Now, from that point of view, the last question would be two part. One is to Shankar and the other to Nishtha. So when this decision of taking or putting this on pause, or rather closing this idea, came into being, how did y'all approach this, Shankaran? And the other part of the question is to Nishta. How did you think about that, right? So I'll start with Shankaran. It's a tough one, but I hope this will be interesting for the viewers, which is really why I brought it. Shankaran, sorry, you're on mute.
After all these years, so much for experience, right? But yeah, uh, uh, what was I saying? Yeah, I think that's part of being a mentor, right? In a manner of speaking, let me also, there's a fourth point on that spectrum that we talked about: supervisor, coach, mentor. And there's a fourth point: parenting, right? A mentor shares a lot with the parent. This might not be acceptable in management jargon to say that, but the truth is there is a lot in common with parenting, right? And every parent knows that you sometimes have to give your kid bad news, and you have to learn to deliver it at the time that will have the maximum impact on the growth and the development of the kid. You're not dealing with a kid anymore, you're dealing with a fully formed adult, but that doesn't mean that your role has changed very much. And so, to your question, it's always hard. It's always very, very hard. It relates to something else that I think are some of the values that we stand for, I stand for, Slingshot stands for, which is that we invest ourselves. As people, we invest ourselves into whatever engagement we have. Otherwise, we don't do it. It's not worth it. You got to throw yourself into it 100%. And when you throw yourself into something 100%, and in Nishta's case, she threw herself into it 1,000%, to have to tell the other people you're working with shoulder to shoulder to say, "Hey guys, I think we need to call it off now," is not easy to do. So we agonized over it a lot internally to Slingshot, and then finally we told Nishta that, hey, listen, I think we need to consider other options, and I I leave it to her to say how she took that.
Was in my perspective also, because like we tried a lot of things, we did a lot of things, and it was very satisfactory that I wouldn't say that we left any stone unturned. You know, anything that we thought that could be useful, I discussed that idea, and then we created execution plan, and we did. And the idea and the good part with our association was that we all were absolutely aligned on the vision. We see value in the vision, so we never had this problem that, oh, maybe you should do that, or maybe I should be doing that. So we were all very focused and aligned, and I never hear this from Shankaran sir or anybody that your vision is not right. You know, we were very much aligned. So, and we knew that there are things without which we cannot continue, we cannot build this organization, and one of those critical aspect was funding. So though it was a little bit of emotional decision for me, because you know, spending 3 years keep working on it, and you tend to feel so attached to your idea, and you feel that maybe after 3 months, you know, something magical will happen and you will do that. But at the same time, it was very I mean, it was like objective conversation that if we are not raising funds, then we cannot build this. It needed money, and that wasn't happening. So, so yeah, and in fact, Slingshot Shankaran sir helped me to take that decision objectively without being too emotional about it. So, so yeah, I think it was that I wouldn't say absolutely emotional, sir, but it was pretty objective conversation that we had, and we had this clarity since beginning. Let's give entire 6 months and then see what happens.
All right. Thank you for, I mean, to both of you for sharing your perspectives about that critical decision that that Nishta has had to face, you know, as a part of her ex startup. But it's not an easy thing to discuss. And Nishta, kudos to you for being so open and honest about your
Absolutely,
experience. Really appreciate you
absolutely,
doing this, and for sharing, you know, all those experiences that you've had with the founders, with everybody who's listening in, because there's so much learning that is there for the founders and for anybody else or you know, that's listening in. Um, really appreciate you doing this, and also I think this is time for us to call it a wrap. We've beyond the planned schedule, so thank you so much, you know, for listening in to the viewers in particular. We'll be back again with another such session. Until then, you can follow these excellent panelists. Shankaran Nair is on LinkedIn. Please do follow him, as well as Nishta. She's also on LinkedIn. And you know, if you'd like to connect with them, explore anything at all, please do that. And also, please do follow the Telangana emission. If you feel that there is some synergy that you have with us, please do connect and engage with us, with me also. We're all active, very social, so please do that. And lastly, I'd like to thank Shankaran for doing this. This was incredibly fun doing this with you in a session of this kind on a topic that is very close to your and my heart as well. And you know, for sharing your perspectives as a mentor as to how you approach this, and hopefully this will also resonate with other mentors, maybe the others who want to be mentors in that process. And then, of course, also to Nishtha for doing what she did, incredibly brave. I'm still you know, reflecting on, you know, how she managed to do this and be you know, in a position to share all of these experiences. Very kind of you, Nishta, for agreeing to do this.
Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
the opportunity, and it was great interacting with both of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Praveen, for having us here, and Nishta for being here. Took a lot of courage.
Thank
All
you.
right, so we'll call this a wrap. Thank you, both of you. Thank you, listeners.
Bye, guys.